In the quiet suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia, Oliver and Sarah's life seemed perfect, a home they had worked tirelessly for, a love that had stood the test of time, and dreams that felt just within reach. But beneath the surface, something was beginning to unravel. Financial struggles were slowly chipping away at their happiness, and the weight of mounting debt was pressing harder every day. Late one night, unable to sleep and desperate for a way out, Oliver had an idea, a risky, reckless plan that could either change their lives forever or destroy them. With their future hanging by a thread, the couple finds themselves at a lavish casino in Las Vegas, where fate gives them a fleeting glimpse of hope, followed by an even darker twist. What starts as a desperate gamble turns into a decision that will test the limits of love, trust, and morality. But in a world where money can buy anything, how much are they willing to sacrifice for a dream? As you listen to this story unfold, we want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments below. We love hearing from you. A dream built together in the heart of suburban Atlanta, nestled between tree-lined streets and quiet, unassuming homes, Oliver and Sarah had built a life that, from the outside, appeared to be the very picture of success. Their house, though modest by many standards, was a reflection of years of hard work, sweat and sacrifice. They had saved up for every single brick, every coat of paint, and every piece of furniture that made their house feel like a home. It wasn't luxurious, but it was theirs, a place where dreams had been made, shared, and cherished. Oliver, a man of 34, had always been the steady hand, the pillar of their small family. He worked long hours as a sales manager at a local electronics store, managing teams and keeping track of numbers. But no matter how much he worked, it never seemed to be enough. The pressure of paying off their mortgage, covering bills, and keeping Sarah happy weighed on him like a heavy burden. He was proud of what they had accomplished, but deep down, he knew that their financial situation was hanging by a thread. Sarah, just a year younger than Oliver, was a woman of warmth and intelligence, with a natural ability to make any space feel welcoming. She worked as a freelance graphic designer, taking on projects for local businesses and clients. Sarah loved her job, but the inconsistent income made it difficult to plan for the future. There were times when she found herself working late into the night, her computer screen casting a soft glow in the quiet of their home. But even with her late nights and creative projects, she couldn't escape the reality of their financial struggles. Their love was undeniable. Oliver and Sarah had been together since high school. They had shared so many memories over the years. Their first date at a local diner, their late-night walks around Atlanta, dreaming of their future together. They were each other's best friends, and their bond had only deepened as the years went by. But as the pressures of life mounted, cracks began to appear. The stress of money problems, combined with the weight of unspoken fears and insecurities, began to fray the edges of their once perfect relationship. It wasn't that they didn't love each other. It was just that sometimes love alone wasn't enough to make everything okay. The reality of living paycheck to paycheck began to take its toll. Sarah would wake up in the middle of the night, unable to sleep, her mind racing with thoughts of unpaid bills and overdue loans. Oliver, too, would lie awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, wishing he could provide more for her, for their future. He was terrified of the idea that one day they might lose everything they had worked so hard for, their home, their security, their happiness. But no matter how hard things got, they kept pushing forward. They had no choice. Sarah clung to the hope that things would eventually improve, that somehow, some way, their hard work would pay off. Oliver, though, was beginning to feel the strain of keeping everything together. He was a man of pride, and asking for help was something he wasn't accustomed to doing. The idea of admitting to others, or even to himself, that they were struggling was something he couldn't bear. One evening, after a particularly long day for both of them, they sat down in their small living room, the weight of their worries hanging over them like a dark cloud. The conversation turned, as it often did, to their financial situation. Sarah tried to stay positive, but Oliver could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She was tired of pretending everything was okay. "I know we've been through worse before, Oliver," Sarah said softly, looking down at the cup of tea in her hands. "But it feels different now, like we're running out of time." Oliver leaned back in his chair, running his fingers through his hair. "I know. It's like we're constantly fighting a losing battle." There was silence between them for a few moments, the reality of their situation sinking in. The house, the bills, the dream of a future together, it all felt so fragile now. Oliver wanted to tell her that everything would be fine, that they would get through it as they always had. But the truth was, he wasn't sure anymore. The weight of their mounting debt was starting to feel like too much to bear. But then, just as the silence seemed unbearable, Oliver's mind began to wander, his thoughts going to a place he hadn't dared consider before. What if there was a way out? What if, just for once, they could take a risk and make everything right again? The strain of reality. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the financial burden on Oliver and Sarah only grew heavier. The once calm mornings now began with the sharp sting of reality. Each new bill that arrived in the mail felt like a dagger to their peace of mind. The mortgage payment, credit card bills, and mounting student loans constantly reminded them that no matter how hard they worked, it was never enough. There was always another expense, another crisis on the horizon. For Oliver, it was a slow burn. Every phone call with the bank, every late-night conversation with Sarah was a reminder of how close they were to losing everything. At work, his performance began to slip. He wasn't as sharp in meetings, his focus wandering as the pressure mounted. His boss, a man named Greg, noticed the change in Oliver. Greg was a tough, no-nonsense type, and he didn't have much patience for personal problems bleeding into work. "You're slipping, Oliver. This isn't like you," Greg said one morning in the break room, his eyes narrowing as he handed over a report. "You need to get your head back in the game, or things might start looking different around here." Oliver smiled weakly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm working on it, Greg. Just got a lot on my plate right now." The truth was, Oliver was barely keeping it together. Every time he walked into the office, he felt like an imposter, someone pretending to be in control when, in reality, he was falling apart. His professional life, which had once been his pride, now felt like another piece of the puzzle he couldn't solve. At home, things weren't much better. Sarah, too, was feeling the weight of their situation. She would stay up late, staring at the screen of her laptop, but the work didn't flow as easily as it used to. Her creative spark seemed to have dimmed, replaced by the constant anxiety about money. She would watch Oliver as he paced the living room, his brow furrowed in thought, trying to figure out how they would make it through the next month. It wasn't just the bills that were piling up. There were also the whispers of doubt that crept into their relationship. Tensions began to rise, and the small arguments that used to be easily resolved now lingered, unresolved. Oliver was increasingly short with Sarah, his patience running thin as the pressure continued to mount. He didn't mean to snap at her, but the constant fear of losing their home, their security, was eating away at him. Sarah, on the other hand, was trying her best to hold everything together, but the cracks were starting to show. She wanted to be strong for Oliver, to be the steady one in their relationship, but it was becoming more and more difficult. She knew that Oliver was struggling, and she knew that their love wasn't enough to solve their financial woes. One evening, after another long day of work, Sarah collapsed on the couch, her face pale and exhausted. Oliver sat beside her, the weight of the world still pressing on his shoulders. He looked over at her, his heart aching as he saw the toll the stress was taking on her. "I don't know how much more of this I can take, Oliver," Sarah said softly, her voice cracking. "Every day feels like we're drowning, and I don't know how to fix it." Oliver reached for her hand, his own trembling. He hated seeing her like this. He hated that he couldn't provide the life he had promised her, the future they had once dreamed about. He tried to muster a reassuring smile, but it felt hollow. "I know, Sarah, I know, but we'll get through this, okay? We just need to keep pushing forward." But deep down, Oliver wasn't sure if that was true anymore. He was tired, physically and mentally exhausted. The constant pressure of keeping up appearances, of pretending everything was okay, was breaking him. He could see the same exhaustion in Sarah's eyes. They were both at their breaking points, and neither of them knew what to do next. The breaking point came on a cold Thursday night, when the final blow landed. It was just after dinner, and they were sitting at the kitchen table, the last remnants of their meal on the plates in front of them. The phone rang, its shrill tone slicing through the silence of the room. Oliver picked it up, expecting another bill collector, but instead, it was the bank. The call was short, direct, and it took everything he had not to crumble in that moment. "Mr. Moore, we regret to inform you that your account is now in default. If payment is not made by the end of the month, foreclosure proceedings will begin." The words echoed in his mind long after the call ended. Foreclosure. The word was like a punch to his gut. The house, their home, was now on the line. Sarah looked at him, her face pale. What? What did they say? Oliver could hardly speak. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. "We're out of time, Sarah. We're going to lose everything." The room seemed to close in on them as the gravity of the situation settled in. They had worked so hard, sacrificed so much, and yet it all felt like it was slipping away. For the first time, Oliver realized that all the hard work, all the hours, all the sacrifices couldn't fix what was broken. As Sarah's tears began to fall, Oliver sat in silence, his mind racing for a solution. He couldn't lose their home, their dreams, their future. But what else could he do? A desperate gamble. The weight of the phone call from the bank hung heavily in the air, like an invisible shroud that neither Oliver nor Sarah could escape. For the first time, their future felt truly uncertain. They had always managed to scrape by, but now it was clear that their situation had become dire. The house they had fought so hard for, the very foundation of their shared dreams, was at risk of slipping through their fingers. The following days passed in a blur. Oliver spent hours on the phone, speaking to loan officers, trying to negotiate extensions and pleading for more time. But every call ended with the same cold response. There was nothing more that could be done. Sarah, ever the optimist, tried to keep the mood light, but the fear in her eyes was impossible to hide. The same questions ran through both of their minds. How had it come to this? What had gone wrong? By the end of the week, the exhaustion had taken its toll. Oliver had stayed up all night, staring at the ceiling, his mind running in circles. The thought of losing their home, their memories, and their future together consumed him. He was trapped. Every solution seemed out of reach. As the hours passed, a single thought began to form in his mind. It was a desperate, reckless thought, one that could either pull them out of the abyss or drag them further into it. But at that moment, it seemed like the only chance left. "Sarah," Oliver said, his voice barely a whisper, as he looked up at her with a mixture of fear and determination in his eyes. She turned to face him, sensing the shift in his mood. "What is it, Oliver?" He took a deep breath before continuing. "I have an idea. I'm not saying it's a good one, but I don't see any other way." Sarah frowned, her brow furrowing. "What are you talking about?" Oliver hesitated, then said the words that had been weighing on him. "We go to Las Vegas. We gamble. We take whatever savings we have left and we make one last bet, a big one. If we win, we're out of this mess. If we lose, well, at least we'll have tried everything." For a long moment, Sarah just stared at him, her mind processing the insanity of the suggestion. Las Vegas, the city of high-stakes gambling and wild risks. The idea sounded absurd, reckless, even dangerous. But in Oliver's eyes, she saw the desperation that had taken hold of him. She knew how hard he had fought to protect their life together. This wasn't a moment of clarity. It was a moment of panic. "You want to gamble everything we've worked for?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "That's crazy, Oliver." "I know," he said quietly, the weight of his words hanging in the air, "but we're already losing it all anyway. What do we have left to lose?" Sarah sat down next to him, her hands shaking slightly as she placed them in her lap. She wanted to say no. She wanted to tell him this was a terrible idea and that they had to face their problems head-on. But the truth was, she didn't have a solution either. All the options they had tried had failed. Their last hope was hanging by a thread, and this crazy idea, as insane as it sounded, was the only glimmer of possibility. "Oliver," she began, her voice faltering, "what if we lose? What if it's not enough?" He turned to her, his gaze steady. "If we lose, we're no worse off than we are now. At least we'll know we tried." For a moment, they sat in silence, the room thick with tension. Sarah's mind raced as she thought about their options. In her heart, she knew this wasn't a smart move. But in her gut, she felt the same hopelessness that Oliver did. It was as though the universe had backed them into a corner, and this was the only way out. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice quiet but resolute. "All right, we'll do it. But we need to be smart. We can't go in blindly." Oliver nodded, a mix of relief and fear washing over him. He had no idea what he was getting them into, but for the first time in days, a tiny spark of hope flickered in his chest. They had a chance. It wasn't much of one, but it was the only one they had left. The decision had been made, and in that moment, both of them knew that everything was about to change. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. They cashed in what little savings they had left, packed their bags, and boarded a flight to Las Vegas. The lights of the city called to them, promising adventure and perhaps salvation. But in the back of their minds, both Oliver and Sarah knew the truth. This was a gamble in every sense of the word. As they boarded the plane, Sarah looked over at Oliver, her heart pounding in her chest. "I hope we're making the right decision," she whispered. Oliver squeezed her hand, his voice steady but full of uncertainty. "So do I, Sarah. So do I." The first glimmer of hope. The neon lights of Las Vegas were nothing short of overwhelming. From the moment Oliver and Sarah stepped off the plane, they were consumed by the chaos and energy of the city. The air was thick with the scent of perfume, the sounds of slot machines, laughter, and the hum of excitement. It was as if the city itself had a heartbeat, pulsing with the rhythm of hope and dreams, all of them tethered to the unpredictable force of chance. As they made their way to their hotel, Sarah couldn't help but feel a strange sense of disbelief. It was like walking through a dream that felt so distant from the reality they had left behind in Atlanta. Here, in Las Vegas, everything seemed possible. There were no limits. The stakes were high, the rewards even higher. And though it felt like they were on the edge of a cliff, Sarah couldn't shake the hope that maybe, just maybe, they could catch a glimpse of luck. The hotel they checked into was one of the grander ones on the Strip, towering and extravagant, with glittering chandeliers and marble floors that seemed to go on forever. It wasn't the most luxurious place they could have stayed, but it was enough. They couldn't afford the penthouses or the top-tier suites, but that didn't matter. They had one goal, and one goal only, to change their fate. Once they had settled into their room, Oliver wasted no time. His mind was already set on the casino floor. He had done his research. He knew the odds, and he knew that if they could hit it big just once, everything would change. "I'm heading down," Oliver said, his voice steady, though there was a nervous edge to it. "Are you coming?" Sarah hesitated, her mind a whirl of doubt and fear. They had no idea what they were walking into. The world of high-stakes gambling was a dangerous one, filled with ruthless players and temptations they could never have imagined. But despite her reservations, Sarah nodded. She knew this was their last chance. Together, they walked down the long hallway to the casino, their hearts pounding in sync. The moment they entered the vast, glittering space, they were immediately struck by the atmosphere, the intoxicating mix of excitement, tension, and the constant hum of machines. Everywhere they looked, people were placing bets, watching the roulette wheels spin, or standing by tables where fortunes were being made and lost in a heartbeat. Oliver took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. He could feel his pulse racing, the weight of the decision pressing on his chest. This wasn't just a gamble on the roulette wheel or at the blackjack table. This was a gamble with their lives, with everything they had worked for, everything they had hoped for. They walked to the nearest roulette table. It was filled with people, all ages, all walks of life, each one hoping that tonight would be their night. Oliver glanced at Sarah, who looked at him with a mixture of excitement and fear. "Do you really think we can do this?" Sarah asked, her voice almost a whisper. Oliver smiled, though it was thin and shaky. "We have no choice." They exchanged a brief look, a silent agreement passing between them. They had come this far. They weren't turning back now. As Oliver handed the dealer their money, the rush of anticipation hit them both at once. The chips in their hands felt foreign, like they didn't belong there. But there was no time for second-guessing. Oliver placed their first bet, a modest one, testing the waters. They were playing it smart, or so they hoped. Every moment felt like a lifetime as they waited for the ball to land, their eyes locked on the spinning wheel. The ball slowed, bounced around, and then, click, it landed on their number. A wave of disbelief and excitement washed over them. "We won!" Sarah gasped, her eyes wide with shock. Oliver couldn't believe it either. They had just won a modest sum, but it was a start. It was a sign that maybe, just maybe, luck was on their side. The next few rounds were a mix of cautious bets and small wins. Their confidence began to build. The tension that had gripped them since they arrived started to loosen, if only just a little. They were still very much in the game, and for the first time in what felt like forever, they could breathe. But as the night wore on and their winnings grew, Oliver's mind started to shift. The fear of losing it all, of walking away empty-handed, seemed to fade with every chip they accumulated. It was an intoxicating feeling, this rush of success. He could see the possibility of a brighter future, a life without the crushing weight of debt. They were on the verge of something incredible. But then, as all gamblers know, the tides of fortune can change in an instant. One bad roll, one missed opportunity, and it could all come crashing down. Oliver felt it then, the nagging doubt that had always been there, hiding beneath the surface. Was this luck, or was it just the calm before the storm? As the night stretched on, Sarah began to feel the same unease. She had seen the change in Oliver's demeanor. The excitement, the euphoria, were slowly being replaced with something darker, more obsessive. She knew it was only a matter of time before their luck would run out, but she didn't want to believe it. Not now, when they were so close. But for now, they were winning. And in Las Vegas, that was all that mattered. The fall. As the hours ticked by, the atmosphere around the roulette table shifted. The bright lights, the loud cheers, the laughter, all of it felt like a dream that had been spun into reality. Oliver and Sarah were riding the high of their early successes, but deep down, both of them felt the underlying tension building. Their winnings were stacking up, but so was the weight of their gamble. They both knew that at any moment, their luck could run out. Oliver felt a rush every time the wheel spun, every time the ball landed in their favor. Each win made him feel more invincible, more convinced that this was their turning point. But with every round, a darker side of him began to emerge, an almost obsessive desire to keep going, to push the limits further. He couldn't stop now, not when they were so close to turning their entire life around. Sarah, on the other hand, was feeling conflicted. While part of her wanted to believe in the possibility of a miracle, another part of her was growing uneasy. She had seen this before, the way Oliver's determination could tip into obsession, the way the wins could feel like nothing more than a prelude to the inevitable crash. She had never imagined that a night of gambling would bring them this far, but now that they were here, the stakes felt impossibly high. She kept glancing at Oliver, trying to read his expression, searching for any signs of doubt, but there was none. He was all in. And then it happened. One fateful roll, one bet too many. Oliver placed a larger bet than he had before. His fingers shook as he handed over the chips, a wild look in his eyes. The moment the ball left the wheel, he was already holding his breath, his entire focus locked on the spinning numbers. This time, it didn't land on their lucky number. Instead, it fell on one of the high-risk options, one that had never been in their favor. It was over. The sound of the ball clicking against the wheel seemed louder than it had ever been, a haunting reminder of the uncertainty of luck. Sarah's heart sank as the dealer announced the results. The chips they had earned with such excitement just hours ago were now gone, lost in a single instant. "No," Oliver muttered under his breath, staring at the empty space where their winnings had been. His body was frozen, his mind racing, trying to grasp what had just happened. The euphoric feeling that had filled him only moments before was now replaced with a sinking, hollow feeling that gnawed at his insides. He didn't speak for a long time. He simply stared at the table, watching the dealer clear their chips away. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. They had lost everything. Sarah reached for his hand, trying to pull him back to reality, but he didn't move. His eyes were glazed over, and his fingers clenched into a tight fist. "It's all gone," he whispered. "Everything. It's all gone." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. The thought of losing everything they had worked so hard for, all the effort, the sacrifice, the hope, it was now slipping through their fingers. She couldn't find the right words to comfort him, not when she was feeling the same sense of devastation. But there was no time for grieving, no time for regret. They had to move forward, no matter how impossible that seemed. Just as the weight of their loss began to settle in, a voice cut through the noise of the casino, a deep, smooth voice that seemed out of place in the frenzy of the gambling floor. "Is everything all right here?" Oliver looked up, startled, his thoughts scattered. Standing before them was a man in his mid-50s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. His presence was commanding, yet there was an air of calm about him that contrasted sharply with the chaos surrounding them. He had dark hair peppered with grey, sharp features, and an easy, confident smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. It was the kind of smile that made you feel as though he could see right through you. "I'm James," the man said, extending his hand to Oliver, who didn't immediately take it. James didn't seem bothered by the lack of response. He simply stood there, his gaze steady and calculating. "I couldn't help but notice your enthusiasm earlier. You were having quite the run of luck." Sarah was still processing their loss when James's words registered. She felt her pulse quicken, an instinctual unease settling in. There was something about this man, something magnetic but unsettling. She glanced at Oliver, who was slowly coming back to his senses, his gaze now focused on James. James's eyes flickered briefly to the empty table and then back to Oliver. "It's a shame, really. Such a promising streak. But luck can be a fickle thing, can't it?" He smiled again, though this time it was tinged with something far more enigmatic. "Perhaps I can offer a proposition." Oliver raised an eyebrow, unsure of where this conversation was going, but there was something in James's demeanor that made him pause. Something that, for a brief moment, made him feel like maybe, just maybe, they weren't quite done yet. James leaned in slightly, his voice dropping just enough to make the conversation feel intimate. "I'd like to make you an offer. I have the means to change your situation if you're willing to consider it." Sarah looked between Oliver and James, her stomach turning. Something didn't feel right, but they were at a crossroads. They had lost everything. What did they have left to lose? A tempting offer. The casino floor seemed to blur around them as James's words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Sarah's heart raced, and she could feel a knot forming in her stomach. Something about this man, his calm demeanor, the way he spoke as though he had control over everything, set her nerves on edge. But Oliver, still reeling from their loss, was focused entirely on the idea James was proposing. He wasn't thinking about the possible dangers, only the desperate hope that it could be their ticket out of this nightmare. James's proposal was simple, yet it carried a weight of temptation that was almost impossible to ignore. "You see," James continued, his voice smooth and deliberate, "I've been watching you both for a while now. There's something about the way you carry yourselves, the struggle, the determination. I admire that." His gaze shifted from Oliver to Sarah, the look in his eyes lingering for a moment too long. "And I believe I can help you. A substantial sum of money, more than enough to solve all your problems. All I ask in return is a small favor." Sarah's pulse quickened. She glanced at Oliver, who seemed absorbed by the man's words. James, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, leaned in slightly, his tone lowering. "Don't worry. It's not as sinister as it may sound," he said with a smirk. "What I'm proposing is simple. One night, a single evening, and in return, I'll give you $1 million. No strings attached. You'll be free to walk away afterward. I can even arrange for it to be a very discreet transaction. It's a fair deal, wouldn't you say?" Oliver's eyes narrowed, as if weighing the options. He had heard of these kinds of deals before. Stories of rich, powerful men who made offers that seemed too good to be true. And yet here he was, staring down a man who could change their lives with just a few words. $1 million. It was more than they could ever dream of making in a lifetime, and it could solve everything. The mortgage, the debts, the weight of financial ruin that had been hanging over their heads for so long. Sarah, however, felt a surge of unease. The way James spoke, the calm confidence in his eyes, it was all too calculated. There was a danger in his proposal, something that gnawed at her gut. She couldn't quite place it, but she knew that accepting this offer might not be as simple as it seemed. "Oliver, we can't just do this." Sarah finally spoke up, her voice laced with a mix of disbelief and concern. "It sounds too wrong. This man doesn't just offer someone $1 million without expecting something in return. We don't know what we're getting into." James smiled as if he had been expecting her reaction. "I understand your hesitations," he said calmly, "but think of the possibilities. You'll have the money you need. You'll be able to live without fear, without the constant stress of bills and debts. The only thing I'm asking for is a single night in return." His eyes flickered back to Sarah. "One night, and everything changes. Your troubles will vanish. All the stress, all the worry, it will be gone." Oliver was silent for a long moment, his face a mixture of skepticism and desperation. He turned to Sarah, looking for some kind of reassurance. He could see the hesitation in her eyes, the doubt that clouded her judgment. But he was beyond reason at this point. The weight of their failure, the crushing disappointment of losing everything they had worked for, had driven him to the edge. This man, this stranger, was offering them an out, a way to fix everything in a single stroke. "Sarah," he said softly, his voice almost pleading, "we've lost everything already. What do we have left to lose? This is our chance. $1 million, Sarah. We can pay off the house, clear the debt, everything." Sarah looked at Oliver, her heart heavy with doubt. She had always trusted him, believed in their ability to overcome any obstacle together. But this felt like something else entirely. She didn't want to believe it, didn't want to consider the consequences, but deep down, she knew this might be the only way out. The desperation in Oliver's eyes made it harder to resist. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know if I can do this, Oliver." James, sensing her hesitation, leaned forward slightly, his voice gentle but persuasive. "You're both at a crossroads," he said. "This isn't about morality or judgment. This is about survival. $1 million can change everything. Think about it. No more stress, no more fear, just freedom. One night, and everything you've dreamed of will be within reach." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, trying to block out the rising anxiety in her chest. She could feel the pull of the decision, the weight of what was being offered to them. It was almost too tempting to ignore, but at the same time she couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into something much darker than they realized. Oliver looked at her again, his expression torn between hope and desperation. "Please, Sarah, this is our chance. We can't keep struggling like this. Let's just do it, for us." And in that moment, Sarah felt the crushing weight of the decision pressing down on her. She was scared of what they were about to do, scared of the unknown, but at the same time she couldn't deny that this might be their only way out. She took a deep breath and nodded. "All right, Oliver. If you think it's what we have to do, then let's do it. James smiled, his expression calm and pleased. I'm glad you made the right choice. The choice that changes everything. The decision was made, but it did nothing to ease the weight on Sarah's shoulders. The silence between her and Oliver as they left the casino was deafening. $1 million. The offer was too big to ignore, yet it felt wrong, like a line they were about to cross that could never be uncrossed. Back in their hotel room, Sarah's unease only deepened. The golden glimmers of Las Vegas felt distant now. They were caught between hope that this decision might save them and the growing fear that they were about to make an irreversible choice. I don't know if I can do this, Sarah said, her voice small. Oliver, this feels wrong. This man, I don't trust him, and I don't know what he expects from us. Oliver sat beside her, clenching his fists. His mind was overwhelmed, but his desperation was clear. He was used to finding solutions, to being the steady one, but nothing had prepared him for this. They had nothing left. This was their chance, and he couldn't let it slip away. I know you're scared, Oliver said, his voice tight, but we're out of options. This is the only way. You heard him. $1 million. It will solve everything, the house, the debt, our future. Sarah turned to him, looking for reassurance, but only saw the same doubt and fear in his eyes. He wasn't the man who took risks, but now he was. That scared her more than anything. The desperation that drove him to agree with James's offer was overwhelming, and she wasn't sure if she could follow him down this path. Oliver, I can't just forget who I am. We've always lived with integrity. We've never taken shortcuts, and I don't want to start now, she said, her voice shaking. This isn't us. Oliver reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. I get it, but think about what we've worked for. This could be our last chance to get it back. $1 million. We could have the life we dreamed of, Sarah. Her heart ached at the thought. She had always trusted Oliver, always believed they could overcome anything together. But this was different. It wasn't just a financial decision. It was a decision that would change who they were. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the crushing weight of their situation. She wanted to find a way out without compromising everything she believed in, but they were running out of time. The money was tempting, but it came at a cost she wasn't sure she could bear. Oliver, what if it's not worth it? She asked softly. What if the price of this is too high? We can't undo this. Oliver's voice hardened. We're already losing everything, Sarah. What do we have left? The silence that followed was thick with uncertainty. There was no clear answer, no easy way out. Sarah felt trapped in a decision that seemed impossible to make. But as Oliver's words lingered in the air, she realized there might be no choice. Their future, their home, their entire life depended on this moment. If they said no, they might lose it all. I don't know if I can forgive myself for this, she whispered. Oliver's voice was firm, but filled with vulnerability. Maybe you won't have to. Maybe this is just what we need to survive. The night that changes everything. The night they had been dreading had arrived. Sarah lay in bed beside Oliver, her heart racing with a mix of fear, guilt, and anxiety. The lights of the city outside their hotel window seemed so far away, distant and unreachable. The life they had known, their hopes for the future, now felt out of reach. But here they were, about to do something that could either redeem them or haunt them forever. Oliver, still unable to shake the weight of their decision, was pacing the room. His nervous energy filled the space between them, making it harder to breathe. Sarah couldn't look at him, couldn't face the decision they had made together, but she could feel his presence, his tension, his own internal battle mirrored in her own chest. I can't believe this is happening, Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. One night, Oliver, just one night, and everything changes. Oliver paused, his back to her, looking out the window. I know, but this is what we agreed to. We have to do this, for us. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that this was the only way, but deep down, she was struggling with the choices they had made. No matter how much they needed the money, no matter how much they wanted to save everything, she couldn't shake the feeling that something in them was about to break forever. Minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as Oliver walked over to open it. Standing in the doorway was James, looking every bit the part of the man who could change their lives with just a few words. His calm, confident demeanor seemed almost too much for Sarah to handle. But she knew she couldn't back out now. They had already come this far. "Ready?" James asked, his voice smooth and reassuring, as if he had done this countless times before. Oliver nodded, though there was no confidence in his face. Sarah, standing behind him, forced a weak smile and stepped forward, trying to steady her shaking hands. "We're ready," she said, her voice barely a whisper. James stepped inside, his presence filling the room in a way that made Sarah feel both vulnerable and exposed. He smiled, the warmth in his expression contrasting with the coldness that was creeping into her chest. "I want you both to understand something," James said, turning to face them. "This is just business. I'm offering you something of great value, but I expect nothing more than the agreement we've discussed. You won't be asked for anything beyond what we've agreed on." Sarah felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up. His words were rehearsed, practiced, and somehow hollow. They did nothing to ease the gnawing sense of discomfort in her stomach. It wasn't the money that bothered her. It was the way everything was unfolding. It felt wrong, like she was being swept along in a tide she couldn't control. The night that followed was like a blur. Sarah couldn't focus on the details, couldn't allow herself to look too closely at what was happening. She went through the motions, trying to disconnect from the reality of the situation. But every moment she spent in James's presence, every smile, every gesture, felt like a reminder of just how far they had fallen. Oliver, too, was struggling. He had convinced himself that this was the right decision, that the money would solve everything. But as the hours passed, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they had crossed a line that would be impossible to erase. He found himself watching Sarah more than he wanted to, trying to gauge her emotions, trying to understand how she was handling it. But every time their eyes met, there was a distance between them, a space that had never been there before. By the time the night drew to a close, Sarah was emotionally exhausted. She had given herself over to the agreement, but she couldn't shake the emptiness she felt inside. The money, the promises, it all felt hollow. In her heart, she knew nothing could fix what had been broken that night. The trust, the connection between her and Oliver, it was slipping away with each passing second. Oliver, too, was silent. They hadn't spoken much since the night had ended. He didn't know what to say, didn't know how to fix what felt so irreparably damaged. The $1 million, the life they had dreamed of, it all felt so far away now. They had made a choice, but it had cost them more than they realized. As Sarah lay in bed later that night, the weight of it all settled in. The love she had for Oliver, the dreams they had shared, it all seemed so distant now. The man they had become in that room, the decisions they had made, were a far cry from the people they once were. The money, the success, they hadn't solved anything. In the end, it was the cost of their choices that was the hardest thing to bear. The night that changes everything. The night had arrived, and the weight of the decision pressed heavily on Sarah. She lay in bed beside Oliver, her heart a tangled mess of fear, guilt, and dread. The promise of $1 million hung between them like a golden opportunity, but it felt distant, almost unreachable. It was hard to ignore the feeling that no matter how much they needed the money, something important would be lost tonight. Oliver couldn't sit still. His nerves had gotten the best of him, and he paced the room restlessly. Sarah kept her distance, not knowing what to say, how to make sense of the situation. She had never imagined that they would come to this, a man, a proposition, a price on their happiness. "I can't believe this is happening," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "One night, and everything changes." Oliver paused, looking out the window at the bright lights of the city. "I know, but this is what we agreed on. We have to do this." Sarah wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that this was the only way, but deep down, she felt the weight of the choice. It wasn't just money. It was their lives, their integrity, and their love. She wasn't sure if either of them would be the same after this. A knock at the door interrupted their thoughts. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as Oliver opened it, revealing James, standing tall and confident in his tailored suit. He looked like a man who had done this many times before, and his calm demeanor made Sarah even more uneasy. "Ready?" James asked, his voice smooth and assured. Oliver nodded, though his face showed no confidence. Sarah forced a smile and stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly. "We're ready," she said, but her words didn't feel convincing. James stepped inside, filling the room with an air of control. His presence was overpowering, and Sarah couldn't help but feel exposed. He was offering them a way out, but the more she looked at him, the more she realized there was something unsettling about him. "I want you both to understand," James began, his voice calm and calculated. "This is just business. One night, and in return, you'll have everything you've lost. There's nothing more I expect from you." The hollow reassurance in his voice did nothing to ease Sarah's growing discomfort. This didn't feel like a transaction. It felt like something far more dangerous. The hours that followed passed in a blur. Sarah went through the motions, unable to fully focus on what was happening. She couldn't let herself connect to the situation, couldn't allow herself to acknowledge the emotional toll it was taking. Every moment spent in James's presence only amplified her discomfort. It wasn't the money that bothered her, but the way the night unfolded. She had never imagined herself in this position, yet here she was, living a nightmare. Oliver, too, struggled with the reality of the situation. The initial euphoria of the money had worn off quickly, and now he felt the full weight of their decision. He watched Sarah closely, trying to gauge her emotions, but found it difficult to focus. Their bond, the connection they once shared, felt fragile now, strained by the actions they had taken. He knew this wasn't who they were, but the desperation for a way out had clouded his judgment. As the night came to an end, Sarah was emotionally drained. The $1 million felt hollow, and the promise of a new beginning seemed distant. The trust between her and Oliver felt broken. They had made a choice, but it wasn't the right one. The price of their actions had already begun to show. Oliver, too, remained silent. He couldn't find the words to explain what had happened, couldn't figure out how to fix the damage that had been done. The money, their dreams, they all felt far away now. They had made a choice, but it had come at a cost that neither of them fully understood yet. Sarah lay in bed later that night, the weight of it all settling in. The love they once shared, the trust they had built, it felt distant now. The money couldn't fix that. Nothing could. The cost of choices. The days following their night with James felt like a slow unraveling. It wasn't just the weight of the money that lingered. It was the distance between them. The bond that had once been unbreakable was now fraying at the edges. Sarah and Oliver no longer looked at each other the way they had before. The warmth, the trust, had been replaced with something colder, more uncertain. Sarah spent hours staring out the window of their hotel room, trying to make sense of everything. She had hoped that after the night was over, they would be able to move on, that the money would bring relief, that the weight of their debt would be lifted. But instead, it felt like a shadow had fallen over them. The silence between her and Oliver was deafening, and no matter how hard she tried to push it away, she couldn't escape the realization that their lives had changed forever. Oliver, too, was struggling. He had thought that the $1 million would fix everything. They could pay off the house, get back on their feet, start fresh. But now, with the money in their hands, it felt meaningless. The high of winning, of having everything they wanted, had faded quickly. The truth was, they weren't any closer to happiness. They weren't even sure who they were anymore. Their conversations, once filled with plans for the future, had become strained and distant. Every time Sarah tried to talk to Oliver, he would retreat into himself, his eyes focused on something far away, as if he were somewhere else entirely. The connection they had once shared now felt fragile, as if it could shatter at the slightest touch. "I don't know how to fix this, Sarah," Oliver finally said one night, his voice quiet and tired. He was sitting at the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, his hands clenched into fists. I thought everything would be different, but it feels worse. I don't even recognize us anymore." Sarah stood in the doorway, watching him with a mixture of sadness and guilt. She wanted to comfort him, to say the right thing, but she couldn't find the words. The man she had once known was slipping away, replaced by someone she didn't recognize. A man who had made a decision that could never be undone. "We've changed, Oliver," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "We've done something we can never take back. And now, it's like we don't know who we are anymore. I don't know who I am anymore." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had seen it, felt it too. The distance between them, the way their relationship seemed to be slipping through their fingers. He hadn't wanted to admit it, but the truth was impossible to ignore. They had lost something that night. Something that wasn't about money or status or possessions. They had lost trust. They had lost themselves. Oliver stood up slowly, walking towards Sarah. He reached out for her hand, but she pulled away, not out of anger, but out of a deep sense of sadness. She didn't know if she could trust him anymore, didn't know if she could trust herself. The choices they had made had caused a rift between them, and no amount of money could repair it. "Sarah, I thought we were doing this to save us. I thought the money would fix everything, but now it feels like we've lost more than we ever had," Oliver said, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to make this right." The silence that followed was suffocating. Sarah's heart ached for him, for the man she had once known, but she also knew the truth. The truth was that they couldn't go back. They had crossed a line and everything had changed. No amount of money, no kind words, no promises could undo what had been done. "We can't go back, Oliver," Sarah whispered, the tears welling up in her eyes. "We can't go back to who we were. We're different now, and I don't know if we can fix this." Oliver's eyes filled with regret, but he knew she was right. They had made a choice that had cost them more than they could have ever imagined. The $1 million, the house, the security. It was all so insignificant compared to what they had lost. They had gambled their future, and in the end, the price was too high. The price of everything days passed in a quiet blur. Though they had the money they so desperately needed, the relief was short-lived. Sarah and Oliver moved through their lives as if in a daze, their emotions muted and distant. They were no longer the couple who had dreamed together, who had faced their challenges side by side. The $1 million had bought them security, but it had come at a price too high to ignore. Oliver threw himself into work, trying to escape the reality that had settled into their lives. He thought the money would fix everything, the house, the debt, the endless struggles. But now, with the bills paid and their home saved, he found himself feeling emptier than ever. The high of their victory had faded, replaced by a hollow feeling that he couldn't shake. Sarah, too, felt the weight of their decision. She had hoped that the money would bring relief, that it would mend their broken dreams, but it hadn't. It had only exposed the cracks in their relationship, making everything feel even more fragile. The connection they once shared seemed to slip further and further from her grasp. Every time she looked at Oliver, she saw someone she didn't recognize. She spent long hours thinking about their past, about the couple they had been before all this, the love they had once shared, the unspoken understanding between them. It felt distant now, lost in the haze of the choices they had made. She wanted to believe that the money had been worth it, that they could move on, but deep down she knew it wasn't just about paying off debts. They had paid a much higher price. One evening, Sarah sat in their living room, staring at the house they had saved. The walls that once represented a dream now felt like a cage. She had spent so long fighting for this life, for a future with Oliver, but now it felt like that future had been tainted by their choices. Oliver returned home late that night, his face tired and distant. He sat beside Sarah, but the space between them felt vast. She didn't know what to say. There were no more promises left, no more plans for the future. All they had now was the weight of their decision and the emptiness it left behind. "Do you ever think about what we've lost?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I mean, the house is safe, the bills are paid, but what did we really gain? What did we lose? Oliver looked at her, his expression filled with regret. He had hoped the money would fix everything, but now he understood that they had lost more than they had gained. They had sacrificed something vital, something irreplaceable. "I don't know," he said quietly. "I thought it would solve everything, but it hasn't. Not really." They sat in silence for a long time, the weight of their choices hanging in the air. Sarah could feel the distance between them, the gulf that had formed after everything that had happened. The $1 million hadn't changed anything. It had brought them comfort but not happiness. It had given them security but not peace. Sarah looked at Oliver, her heart aching. She realized that no matter how much they had, it could never replace what they had lost. The money couldn't buy back their trust, their love, their connection. It couldn't fix what had been broken. "Can we ever go back?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Oliver didn't answer right away. He didn't know. They had made a choice, and now they had to live with it. They couldn't undo what had been done. But in that moment, they both understood the painful truth. Sometimes the price of survival is the loss of everything you once held dear.